Now, also important to note, top leaders at the Pentagon, they are defending their decision to hold off U.S. support for F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. Initially reluctant, the United States and other NATO countries recently agreed to allow Ukrainian pilots to receive training to fly the F-16 fighters. However, no one has yet committed to hand over any planes. U.S. Defense Secretary said that he hopes that training for Ukrainian pilots on American F-16 jets will begin in the coming weeks. Remember, Washington must legally approve the re-export of the U.S. equipment purchased by allies. Lloyd Austin spoke at a virtual meeting of Ukraine Defense Contact Group as well to discuss the ongoing support for Kiev. Mark Miller, the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman, said that the F-16s are no magic weapons here.
There are no magic weapons. An F-16 is not, neither is anything else. And as we look at what the problem to be solved in at the beginning of this war, it was a defensive fight against mechanized armored forces, Russian forces that were coming across the border. What do you need for that? You need anti-armor weapons. You need lots of them. And you had to keep the airspace clear of Russian close air support that would enable Russian ground maneuver. And that's exactly what was provided.
Now, the United States also says that the F-16s will involve a huge cost and that the Pentagon made a cost-effective decision to supply Ukraine with other military equipment like ground-based air defense systems.
You need a significant number of F-16s or fourth or fifth generation fighters and the pilots to go with them and the sustainment costs and the missiles and the maintenance. All of that package. If you were to do that, just F-16s, you wouldn't have tanks, you wouldn't have Bradleys, you wouldn't have anti-armor weapons, you wouldn't have anything else. You'd spend all your money on just that.
With depleted strength and dated aircraft, the Ukrainian Air Force is struggling. The Ukrainians fly Soviet-era jets like Sukhois and MiGs. The country's current fleet of warplanes is older than modern Ukraine itself. President Zelensky has repeatedly asked for Western fighter jets to help resist the Russian invasion. But there's another issue that seems to be bothering the United States. Has U.S.-provided military equipment been used by Ukrainians to carry out attacks inside the Russian territory? Top U.S. general said his office was looking into images of vehicles allegedly used in an attack in the Russian border region of Belgorod. He said this message for the Ukrainians.
But I can say that we have asked the Ukrainians not to use U.S.-supplied equipment for direct attacks into Russia. Why is that? Because we don't want this is a Ukrainian war. It is not a war between the United States and Russia. It's not a war between NATO and Russia. This is a war between Ukraine and Russia, and we are supporting and supplying and help training and advising and assisting Ukraine. But it is not a direct conflict between the United States and Russia.
Now, for more on this, to understand this better, we are being joined by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis, Senior Fellow and Military Expert for Defense Priorities from Virginia. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. My first question to you: how do you assess this latest move by Russia to deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus? And do you think this raises the risk of a nuclear threat in this war?
Well, you certainly can't just dismiss it and say that it doesn't have any impact. Yet any time you're moving nuclear weapons and you're even contemplating it, that means that the threshold, the mental threshold for using it is coming down, and people are getting more and more comfortable with the very thought of it, which is just a really bad situation to be in. That being said, that I don't see any evidence at the moment that Russia is seriously considering using nuclear weapons, because right now they don't need to. The tactical situation, the conventional situation is actually on their favoring them at the moment, and it looks like it's going to, at least in the near-term future. The only time I would see Russia resorting to nuclear weapons is if NATO forces physically entered the battle against them, or if by some chance over time the Ukrainian side started having significant military success and was driving Russia out, potentially into Crimea, then the chances would go way up. At the moment, I think it's just posturing.
All right, sir. Also, as I mentioned earlier, from what we understand, tactical nuclear weapons happen to be the least regulated weapons. What can you tell us of the implications of this?
Well, part of the problem with this, and this is not just with Russia and Ukraine, this is kind of across the board. Even the United States is into this, where they're trying to develop more and more small yield nuclear weapons, they call them, for tactical nuclear weapons. And the problem is that it makes it some of the countries, it lowers again the threshold of the use, because it makes people think, well, perhaps we can use these tactical nuclear weapons without triggering the mutual assured destruction of strategic nuclear weapons. But the problem is, if you use any nuclear device, people aren't going to really try to measure what was happening. If they see a mushroom cloud go up and they know it was a nuclear strike, then the risk of nuclear retaliation just goes through the roof, and it probably doesn't make any difference. And I think that's the biggest concern, that it makes some people think that it's easier to use than a regular strategic nuclear weapon.
Right. Also, on the other side, we see that the United States Pentagon officials, of course, are defending their decision to hold off support for the F-16s to be sent to Ukraine. How do you assess that, and how do you see that impacting the situation in Ukraine? What do you think is the role of the international community here?
Yeah, I think that Chairman Milley really put it well earlier today. In addition to those sound bites you had a second ago, is that he pointed out that there are over 1,000 fourth and fifth generation fighters in the Russian Air Force. If you're talking a handful of F-16, they're simply not going to make any difference. They're not going to change the terms of the war. It's going to help Ukraine, because certainly they're better than the MiG-29s and the Su-25s that they've been using. But it's not going to change the dynamics. And if people think that this is going to be some sort of game changer, I'm afraid they're going to be disappointed. So I think that probably the United States is a little bit reluctant to want to get involved with this, and I certainly think they should, because the United States has already been the overwhelming supplier of equipment to Ukraine, and if there's going to be any more, it certainly should be European nations or others to provide those. But even then, it needs to be understood this is not going to change the course of the war.
All right. Well, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast with your insights on this.
Thanks for having me.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.